Brand building is identifying, articulating, and then building this territory in the mind, which is your brand.
I'm branding expert Arek here at Ebaqdesign, and my guest today is Peter Wilken. And Peter is a branding expert with over 30 years of experience working with some of the world's most prestigious brands, including brands like Coca-Cola, BMW, Disney, Pepsi, IBM, McDonald's, Shell, and many more. So Peter worked at some of the legendary advertising agencies like Ogilvy and Maida, Leo Burnett, BBDO, and then he co-founded the brand company, and under which he developed his brand building process called brand-centered management. And now Peter is based in Vancouver and he runs his company Dolphin Brand Strategy. So Peter describes his brand building process in his new book, Dim Sum Strategy, Bite-Sized Tools to Build Stronger Brands. Right, so this is the book we are going to talk about today, and I really wanted to have Peter on our podcast today to share with us some of his tools and techniques on how to build stronger brands. Peter, thank you so much for taking time to join us on the show.
My pleasure, Arek. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for finding me and connecting.
Thank you. So in your book, you talk about your process, right, and the tools that you use, and I really like how you give us a lot of different tools and techniques, and you organize it in a way that makes it easy to understand. So we're going to talk about the process in a second, but I just wanted to start with what a brand is and how you define a brand, because different people, so whether it is for entrepreneurs or CEOs interested in brand building or for creative professionals, we may define brands differently. So, and we may understand what a brand is in kind of a different way. So some people may think that, a brand is just a logo. It's much more than that, right? So in your book, you talk about brand being a promise quite a lot, and brand building as managing people perceptions. So can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. It's always a kind of starting question. What is a brand? And I've heard many good definitions. Mine is that it's a perception in the mind. It's a territory that you can own and ring fence and define that creates an expectation of an experience. A brand, many people seem to refer to as a tangible object you can touch, but it's not. It's a perceptual thing that exists in the mind. And that's why marketing is such a powerful tool, because you can change perceptions with the right message very, very quickly. And so that is why there's such a key role for marketers to play. You also mentioned or alluded to the difference between branding and brand building. And I find that definition needs clarification all the while. I mean, I'm constantly saying, come on, we'll hire you, we'll do a branding project. And I said, you mean brand building project? Not to do branding down, but when we first started up with the brand company, myself and two colleagues in Hong Kong, this was one of the founding premises that, millions and millions and millions of dollars were being spent on what we called the superficial packaging of the brand, and not to do it down. It's super important. You are a design guy, you know that. But the superficial packaging would have been like things like the visual identity, even the advertising that I'd spent 25 years of my career doing, the communication of it, and not the substance of the experience that you were actually delivering, which is more impactful in terms of determining this territory in the mind that I was talking about, the perception. So that's the difference between branding and brand building. Brand building is identifying, articulating, and then building this territory in the mind, which is your brand. And it's something that needs constant management, constant nurturing, constant checking relative to what your competitors are doing and to what your consumers and your customers are interpreting. So yeah, that's it.
Right. So some of the takeaways would be that we spend too much attention is paid to superficial packaging and identity design, but it's all about defining the brand first and thinking about how we want to position that brand in the minds of our customers, right?
I wanted to underline that. I should say, I'm not saying packaging and design and identity and advertising is not important. It's hugely important, but it's there to reinforce your positioning once you've established that. Too often, we get called in to say, where's the problem? What can you do? I think, we need to rebrand. And what by that they mean we need to refresh our logo. But in fact, it doesn't take much digging at all to find that their strategic positioning, what it is that they do and for whom and why, is the thing that needs attention, not their logo. So you need to go much, much deeper than that. But because it's tangible and because they can see that that's where their money is going and there's something you can talk about around, I understand why it tends to always get translated into, let's rebrand, let's change our identity. I mean, I don't mean to insult people out there. That our clients and our customers are smart enough to know that they need to go deeper than that, but not necessarily familiar with how we express it and how we do it. So I listened to one of your earlier podcast guests, and he was quite right about talking about building a blueprint for the brand. In fact, that's what I put in the book as well. Having a blueprint, a strategic blueprint to map out what it is that you want to do with your brand and how you build it and construct it in a way that you would, like an architect would, a building. So that's a large part of what the book is about, is helping you define your own stepwise blueprint. But I also wanted to do it in a bite-sized way. That's why it's called kind of dim sum strategy, so that you can cherry pick things and pick up useful bits within 10 minutes. And I know that's the kind of the Gen Z millennial way is, give it to me really fast and quick, and so that I can get something useful out of it. And if I'm interested, I'll dig a little deeper. So that's the concept. So it's done in a book form.
Yeah, and I think the book is fantastic, and I think it's easy to read. First of all, it's easy to read, and it's easy to understand. You don't use industry jargon or anything like that. So for our listeners, for you guys, whether you are a creative professional or entrepreneur, you run a big company or just a small startup, you're gonna find something interesting, because Peter gives you a lot of different tools and techniques and specific examples of big brands, so we can all understand, because we know these brands and we can relate and we can understand the concept behind them. So let's talk about your process now. Since we know how you define a brand, how we should define a brand. A brand is a promise. And I like it. I also wanted to mention, in the introduction, you talk about it, just to give our listeners an example, perhaps, right? So you give this example. If we think of car brands, for example, if you say Volvo, what do you think about? What is the one word that comes to your mind? Most of the people would say safety, right? When it comes to BMW, they would say performance, Toyota, reliability, and so on. So that's referring to what you were talking about. Is about building that perception and that promise to customers, and is way beyond just identity and design, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. It's great that you've remembered those things. That's what I mean about owning a territory and a positioning. I mean, Volvo owns safety. You can hardly take it away from them now. And even when they try and screw it up, as they did, in the early 20s, when they kind of research people said, you're building boxy cars and they don't look as good as your competitors, Mercedes and BMW and Jaguar. And so they kind of redesigned their cars in a more stylish way, typically converging to the norm, as most cars do now, and came out and said, look at us now, we're stylish. And people said, no, you're not, you're Volvo, you're safety. And they're quite rightly now, that stylish is something that they can't, it is not a negative now. It's not a reason for not buying a Volvo, but the reason you buy a Volvo is still for safety, and they still pride themselves in their amazing safety standards when the car's way beyond airbags. Now it's all about lane assists and alerts and automatic stopping systems and things like that, which they are pioneering again. So they know their place, and they do it extremely well. Yeah.
Now we are going to take a quick break here, but we'll be right back. Listen, my mission is to help people build and design iconic brands. So whether you're a business leader who wants to become more intentional with branding and all of its aspects, or you're a creative professional who wants to attract powerful clients and surely be able to help them with branding, Then you need to start with a discovery session in order to develop a strategy that will inform all your creative work. And everything that you need in order to learn how to do that, you can find in my online courses at ebaqdesign.com/show, where I share with you my worksheets, case studies, video tutorials, and other additional resources to help you feel safe and strong about your process. Now let's get back to our interview.
So now let's talk about the process. Basically, you call your process brand-centered management, right? And so you divide your process into 4 steps. Just for you guys to give you like a quick overview, and so we are going to talk about a bit about each step. So it's discovery, definition, direction, and delivery. So starting with discovery. So here in this step, we just want to discover your brand. We just want to learn about our brand and uncover current perception of that brand in the environment that operates in, the challenges we face, the opportunities we have. So can you just walk us through this first step of your process and perhaps talk a bit more about some of the tools that we can use to do the discovery?
Yeah, I'll do that, Arek. It might be useful for your listeners to understand some of the genesis of how we got behind brand-centered management, because in the end, I mean, this was over 20 years ago. My colleagues and I set this up now, and in hindsight, we realized we're probably one of the first specialist brand consultancies out there ever. And what, in fact, we were doing was more change management through the brand than anything else. And brand-centered management sounds like what the promise was. It was putting the brand at the center of your business. And the argument went something like this, which is, if your brand is what you want to stand for in your most valuable customers' minds in the future in a positive way, why wouldn't you want to be able to articulate that and make that central to everything that your organization does first, primarily, and then says through its communications? And so your brand, and the principal part of your brand, is what is your promise? What is your overarching commitment to your customers that you're going to deliver for them, that's going to deliver a benefit? What is the benefit that promise delivers? How are you going to go about doing it, the spirit or the culture of the way in which you're going to do it? And most importantly, why? Your role, your raison d'etre. Way before Simon Sinek was saying it and marketing it brilliantly, it was that. Right. It's, what's your reason for existing? And then you can tie it in. There are a few other things like icons, attributable assets that you own that can invoke the whole. But you put these all together in your little velvet bag with its golden thread, and you've got what comes and cemented as a DNA. Anyway, so that was how we started off doing that. And once you define what your DNA is, it can help drive your organizational strategy, how you communicate internally with your people, the processes and systems that enable or hinder you to be able to deliver the products and services, that deliver the experiences, that drive the external perceptions, and the external perceptions ultimately come back to what people think it is your brand, which is what you're trying to articulate. So it's a circular process called brand-centered management. And we found the easier way of being able to walk people through the process was, as you were rightly saying, the 4 Ds. That's how we label it. Something that sticks: discovery, definition, direction, and delivery. And discovery is basically asking the question, how do people currently perceive our brand? And you ask a similar set. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Show you guys what you were talking about this circular process, right?
Perfect. Thank you. And I can see you've marked it up. You've really done your homework. I'm impressed, Arek. Your clients must be happy clients, because you clearly do your homework. not
I just like to highlight the best parts, so I can just come back and and start implementing those new things that I learned, right?
That's great. So discovery. Typically, we could find that this process, by the way, works just as big for the huge brands we did. I did this for Shangri-La Global Positioning. We did it for AIG. You did it for Sun & Kai Properties, the biggest property development company in the world, as I do for a small local YouTube, company here, Blue Mountain guys out of Vancouver, 12 people still doing, a nice 3 or 4 million turnover selling men's hair care products online. And the principles remain the same, whether you're a university, an engineering company, a small startup, or a well-established organization, these principles work. And so anyway, back to discovery, the first phase. We found that you can get an awful long way without having to do hugely expensive or time-consuming work by doing structured qualitative interviews with the stakeholders closest to the brand. And those stakeholders are typically senior people or within the organization, but also people, I would call it the coalface of whatever it is you're delivering, and some key customers as well. We also used to even question some competition, some friendly competition, to make sure that we were getting a check and balance in it. But the qualitative side of it helps you do that very quickly. You can ask a set of well-structured questions, and we've honed our questions after many years of research into no more than 9 or 10 questions that can get you a long way, and they start off general and go specific. So it would be kind of things like, when I say your brand name, Ebaqdesign, whatever it is, what springs to mind? Right. And because that's basically the real world. Marketers would like you to get straight into your little category, and then once you're there in your mind, you can start referencing things. But if you're not there, that's actually the real world. People aren't thinking about Ebaqdesign, until we mention it or we're talking about it. They don't think about dolphin brand strategy. They don't think about dim sum strategy until we're talking about it. So you've got to be aware, you've got to be salient, and when you are, what is it that they're taking out? And typically in this very, very complex world, they won't have more than 2 or 3 associations. And they may be what you want them to be, or they may not be what you want them to be. But that's why we start from general to specific. And then you can probe it a little bit. And then you can go through the classic, what are your perceived strengths of the brand? What are the things that are challenging? What's the competitive frame? What are the dynamics within the category? What's happening? What's not happening? Are they following suit? What do you think the brand is trying to promise you? So that you actually ask questions that come into the next stage, which is about your DNA. What do you think? What benefits are you looking for from this? Is it delivering? How are they going about doing it? What's the culture? The way, and typically that's often how brands differentiate, because they deliver very similar things. Whether you're DHL or UPS, you get your package on the door, but the perception of how you do it differently, and whether or not you've got friendly delivery guys or a recognizable yellow van, or what those are the kind of things that you differentiate at this level. So all of those are brought into the mix, and then you ask open-ended questions like, what would you do to change things to improve, which lead you down a directional path. So you can do that within a well-structured interview, and you don't need too many, 15, 20, 25 interviews, and patterns emerge very quickly. And of course, you do your homework, you do your quantitative analytical research as well, and you employ your customers often within their own team. They know their businesses really well. So you go through a discipline of quantifying it, and you match that with your qualitative in order to be able to identify key opportunities for the brand. So that's the discovery section in 2 minutes quickly. And then
so
that
just
leads in.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, sorry. So I just wanted to sum up for our listeners before we go to the next step. So discovery is all about preparation for developing strategy, right? So it's all about collecting that data and then analyzing and drawing some insights. So about the company, your customers, the current trends, and the competition and things like that. So basically, it's as you mentioned, it's all about interviewing the key stakeholders, right? And then also doing additional research, competitive review, and things like that. And it's all about asking the right questions. Some of those questions you guys can find on page 44 here. where Peter talks about specific questions that you can use to run those interviews. So so just to sum up, it's all about processing that raw data and drawing insights, right? Before we move to the next step, which is definition, and in this step, this is actually your workshop, right? Your brand DNA workshop that you run with your clients. So can you just walk us through this step?
Sure. And so the definition stage is basically your DNA, your brand DNA. We call it a DNA because it's like its genetic counterpart. It is a template for replicating consistent desired experiences for your brand. And like a biological DNA, every single one is unique. So your brand is unique. It's like a thumbprint, which is why the thumbprint on the front of the book. DNAs and people are complex. Yeah, thanks for doing it. But they're also, we know we change moods. We have to work in different complex environments with different types of people and different challenges. But we still have easily identifiable, definable characteristics, and that's what your DNA of your organization or your brand is attempting to do. So there are basically, 4 or 5 key components of your DNA, and we mentioned them before. The first one would be your role. Why do you exist? What's your raison d'etre? It's the why question, and it's probably the most difficult to answer. So we save it for last in the process. We start with the promise and your benefit, and the promise is what's your overarching commitment to your key customer stakeholders. So it begs the question also of saying, who are our key stakeholders? And it forces you into some question of saying, what's the real bullseye? When we boil this down, we all know that we've got multiple customer segments, and the book later on goes into telling you how you can sort that out into practical segments. We call it practical segmentation, so that you don't kind of try and get into the minutiae of individualizing everything. That's just not realistic. But you can focus on the key 4 or 5 target segments that are going to drive your business. So back to the promise, what's your overarching commitment to them that you promise to deliver? Having delivered that against that promise, what benefit do they get from you delivering your promise? What does it mean to them? And then we talk about what we call the spirit or the culture, which is how you go about doing that, the way in which you do it. So, you could deliver your promise in a very Germanic, efficient, technological, cold but ultimately reliable way, or you could be extremely, soft and interpersonal and empathetic and more emotional in your input, within the same category, but you could have very, very different approaches and feels, for example. So when you start tying those elements all together, there's an aspect of the why, which we say is what you believe as well, that can bring that out. And we also talk about icons. Icons are things that evoke an image of the whole. So an icon, sometimes it's a logo, but sometimes it's not a logo. So Michael Jackson's glittery glove would evoke the image of the whole Michael Jackson, and you would get into Thriller and all his things like that just by looking at a glittery silver glove. The Rolling Stones have got the big fat red lips, which has almost become iconic with them now. When you see that those lips, the Rolling Stones own that. At Burnett's, we had red apples. Anyone in the ad industry would know a red apple was Leo Burnett, and black pencils and Reaching for the Stars and things like that. Ogilvy's was red socks. And I'm just taking small examples within organizations, but they're practical for clients. So that's the definition phase. And the important thing about this, Arek, is that it's the DNA development workshop is a shared process. So we facilitate it, but the owners are the brand owners. And they use language that they can see that has come out of the discovery report, because the discovery report asks questions about the components of the DNA. Why is it that you exist? What were you promising? What benefit are you delivering? How are you different to competitors? How are you going about delivering it? Those kind of things, and where are you going to take it in the future? So you've got a common ground that people can recognize and share, and it deals with some, difficult questions, but it shines the opportunity for the brand in the future as well. So you've got all of that, and people then, go and try and craft this in language. A DNA goes way beyond just language, but it starts with the written word. And then you bring it to life in other ways, in music and visuals and stuff like that. But it's very difficult to craft by committee, wordsmith, as you know. If you're a writer, you have to kind of take it away individually and then craft it, and then, as I'd say, tire kick it. But it's done as a group, collectively. People see that it's a difficult process. They see the whole process of strategy unfolding, because they have to make choices between what they wish to say. They can't be all things to all men, and you end up being nothing to everybody. So you really focus it, and the whole idea is to really get as single-minded and as focused as possible. And when you've got that, it's like a shining light or a beacon, a lighthouse that says, this is us always and consistently. And that you're getting somewhere after you come back after 2 or 3 weeks of doing this session, and you individually then go around and to participants and say, can we improve it? Can we tweak it here? Any words that are superfluous that we can get rid of? Anything that we're missing that we have to add? But you keep it really tight. And before or not, you can't take anything away, because they say, no, this is perfect. This is us. Leave it with us. And then you start living it. You start bringing it to life. And that's the direction phase. The direction phase is how are we going to go and take this forward? And typically then, I give you some tools in the book again. There are different ways in which you can set up a strategic framework, as we say. I mean, typically, I use the 4-pillar Parthenon, which basically says, boil it down to a rule of 3. If you focus on 3 or 4 things, big things, you can get those done and you can remember them. If you start getting into long lists of more than that, they don't get done. And that's basically what the 4-pillar Parthenon is. It says, what's your foundation that you're building on, your core values, your key positioning, your DNA. And then the 4 pillars are how do you actually, build what you're trying to do. So what are the key things that you're going to do? You're going to do this through marketing and communications. Are you going to do this by, delivering an incredibly unique product experience? Are you going to do this by having the most efficient operating systems when there's so many other things to focus on? Are you going to do this by being the environmental leader in the world or whatever? And then ultimately, the roof of the goals that you're aiming to achieve, but also how you're perceived, your overall communication. So in the direction phase, I help say, let's define your strategic framework. Here's a tool in which you can use it to make some choices easier. Strategy is only choice. It's what you choose to do, and it's what you choose not to do. Right. So the framework is a tool for making that choice decision easier for you when it's complex. And then, so once you've simplified it, you add detail onto it as well. So within each of the pillars, you'll have, I think, 2 or 3 strategic priorities. What are the things that you have to do to achieve the goals of that strategic pillar? So I like the rule of 3. I don't know why. It just seems to be appearing in nature the whole time. It's the minimum number of legs on a stool that you can have to have a stable platform. 4 is okay as well. You could argue that's more stable. But you start getting more than that, you start losing focus. And every organization, doesn't matter whether you're GE or a tiny startup, there are limits to your resources in terms of what you can do. So focus on 3 or 4 things. And then,
just to wrap up, so just wanted to wrap up for our listeners. So you jumped from definition. So just going back a little bit, so definition is about running this workshop with key stakeholders, and basically a brand consultant's role here is to clear the fog, as you mentioned, and provide this clarity and focus and context, right? And then the next step, as you started talking about, is direction. So where we want to go. So we want to set the course for the organization, to build a brand, right? So, and as you mentioned already, and of course we cannot predict everything, but we want to stay on track. We may change the course of correct the course of our journey, but it's more like a compass, and I like this analogy you give it in your book. So we are just, for example, we are going north. We know that we are going north, not south. So it also refers to what you just said. It's all about making decisions what to do, and what we choose not to do as well, right? So and of course, you present us with a lot of tools here: the strategic ladder, the Pantheon, four-pillar Pantheon, and impact urgency matrix that help us prioritize different tasks and goals and things like that. Okay, so the last step is delivery, right? So it's about actually executing against our plan that we just developed in those previous 3 steps, right? So this is about creating productive working relationships with, other companies, communities, consultants, specialists, and also here you present us with a lot of different tools and how to execute our strategic plan that we've developed previously, right? So, and I really like the tool, the delivery donut, which is really it illustrates nicely and it's easy to remember. Once I saw that, I just think it's brilliant. So, can you talk to us maybe about this tool and about this step a little bit, so we can understand?
So once you've got your DNA, that's your lighthouse as it is. That's your rock. This is you, and you shine your light and say that this is what we stand for. This is who we are. If we're right for you and you're interested in what we do and what we stand for, you'll come to us. Like moths to a bright light. And you've got your direction now. You know what you're going to do: A, B, C, and D, and which order and how you're going to do it. The delivery is executing that simultaneously through multiple channels so that you can do many things quickly. And this is the accelerating it. And typically, especially if you're a small or a medium-sized enterprise, you can't do it all. You definitely need help. And you need to, what I call, divide and conquer even within your organization to be able to execute it. So the delivery donut is a simple visual aid and tool, a reminder to be able to say, yeah, thank you. Here's how you go about it. It's basically, if people are familiar with the old game Trivial Pursuit, it looks like one of those round things that you put 6 cheeses in, and literally you can halve the donut. The top half is the things that you do, so your products and services, and your systems that you're actually delivering against, tangible things that you can deliver against, those things that you're focusing on.
Right.
And the bottom half is the communication, what you say. So it's like internal communications, external communications, and design and delivery. So what we used to do was say, you can focus on separate things. So, if we'd identified that product or service was an area of opportunity, we would put a specialist team within that to be able to design or new product development or maximize something that was going well and be able to filter out those that were not going well. Typically, we spent a lot of time on the service orientation and helping our customers identify what the weakest link was. I mean, typically with 5-star hotels, for example, where everything like a Georgian house facade, on the outside was absolutely wonderful. But the minute you open the door into the kitchen or you go into their bathrooms, which were not as good as the luxurious bars and restaurants that they had put on, you were instantly defined. The magic bubble was broken. So we'd help them identify those things like that so that their standards were completely raised and consistent. So many examples. Anyway, the donut is just one of those tools. You can get more complicated, but it works. Processes and systems. Typically, in large organizations, the blocks would be in that, some bureaucratic holdup or a bottleneck in a system that prevented them from delivering a key service efficiently. And we would go through and bring in specialist process engineers who would go through a stepwise, gap analysis, would literally plaster a wall. Now you can do it digitally with key questions to identify inefficiencies and blockages in the process. And now there's whole lean agile systems brought in from the computer programming world that can help identify those things really quickly. So, but recognizing the right questions to ask in and around those that delivery donut is the power of that tool, and dividing and conquering and spreading them out and making sure that you're doing things simultaneously. It's not just one after the other. The delivery phase is multiple simultaneous expansion against what it is that you're trying to deliver.
Right. Because and some of my notes. So as you mentioned, is about the customer perception is the sum of all their associations, right? So
yes.
With and experiences with the brand. So that's why we need to deliver through different, outputs, consistent experience. As you gave us this example with the bathrooms, right, in this 5-star hotel, right? So that we can create actually that desirable perception, right?
Yeah.
So as we are approaching the end of our interview, please let us know, either for entrepreneurs who want to work with you, how to find more about you, or for creative professionals like myself who want to learn more from you. And of course, I'm going to include a link to your book in the description box.
Well, that's really kind. Thank you. Well, what I'm doing, Arek, is I'm kind of moving more into professional speaking, which is what I used to do. So people can find me on my speaker website, which is Peter Wilken, if I can say it, PeterWilken.com. PeterWilken.com, if you can put that out for your listeners. You can find everything there. There's a link to the book, and there's a link to my consulting business, Dolphin. But typically that's what I'm doing now, is kind of getting much more into the speaker trail. And I talk about creative thinking in general and how you can use that to manage change and unpredictability and uncertainty, in particularly in relation to building brands, because the problem most people I'm finding are dealing with at the moment is you have CEOs and their leadership teams trying to build brands in a world that is incredibly unpredictable, constantly changing, but looking for ways in which to do that. You still need to move forward into the future. And I think, change can either be fearful or very exciting. And it can present many opportunities as well as threats. And we know we've just lived through, the first global pandemic in a century, and most people's worlds have turned upside down. But the reality is some people have benefited enormously from this. Zoom itself, from 20 million to 200 million in months.
It's true.
Other people, Cirque du Soleil, unfortunately, a wonderful thing, but delivering a live event under a tarpaulin, dead in a year, from a $1.5 billion company. So, and that's the level of uncertainty and unpredictability we're dealing with. So I talk about, embracing change and using all of these tools for brand builders and helping guide them. And then, and I work with a team with a small number of clients, maybe half a dozen clients a year, but I can spend good quality time that are a good fit for them, and most importantly, a good fit for me. So I really appreciate that. So that's how you do it. You can find it all on my website, PeterWilken, WILKEN.com.
Sure, I'm going to include those links in the description box. And thanks for taking the time to come on our show and share some of your tips. And for you guys, if you want to learn more, I invite you to check out the book. and check out Peter's website. I'm gonna include those links in the description. So yeah, as you mentioned, during this pandemic, and that's the reason why I want to build stronger brands, because stronger brands, they're gonna survive because they have substance, right? So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and sharing with us some of your tips.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure, and I'm really chuffed that you enjoy the book. And like I said, your clients should feel confident that you really do your homework on this. I can see you're one of these guys that mark a book. I should send you a clean copy.
So thanks for tuning in, and if you've enjoyed this episode of On Branding Podcast, follow me on social media for more tips on branding, strategy and design. This was Arek Dvornechuck from Ebaqdesign, and I will see you in the next one.